Asterisk, I froze the moment the bailiff called my name. I felt sweat bead at my hairline. I heard each footstep echo on the polished marble floor. I wondered if everyone knew how desperately I'd tried to keep this secret buried. I slid into the witness chair, my knees knocking. My lawyer's pen scratched across legal pads beside me. The judge's gavel glinted under the harsh overhead lights. Did they come here expecting a jealous, unstable ex-partner? I swallowed hard. Then the prosecutor stood and thrust a folder toward me. Then she smiled, slow, triumphant. Then she uttered words I'd been dreading. You claimed she was manipulative, but we have recordings where you admit you were obsessed. I clenched the edge of the velvet-covered bench. I couldn't breathe. The jurors leaned forward. My best friend, seated at the back, shifted in her chair, eyes fixed on me. She knows. I had one chance to stop the narrative. One chance to prove that I wasn't the villain in this story. And then I heard the first chime of playback. What happens next? Asterisk, asterisk. I remember the light of early morning slipping through our bedroom blinds. I would lie there, watching dust motes dance, while the world outside stirred awake. I'm Clara Reyes, 34 years old, pediatric nurse, single mother to 6-year-old Mia. Until last year, my life was a rhythm of soothing lullabies, hospital shifts, and cozy movie nights with Alex, my best friend since college. I met Jordan on a rare night off. I was sipping chamomile on a rooftop patio when he leaned over and asked if the seat beside me was taken. His smile was easy, disarming. I was flattered by his attentions, so different from the rushed glances I'd grown used to in the ER. He listened when I spoke of my dreams and my fears. He remembered my coffee order. Within weeks, Jordan and I shared inside jokes and Sunday brunches. He met Mia and praised her doodles on the fridge. He called me every morning with a text, "Good luck today, Nurse Clara." I felt seen. Then came subtle shifts. I'd pick up my phone to text my friend Sophie and find a deleted draft. I'd notice Jordan's eyebrow lift when I laughed at another man's joke on TV. He'd joke, "Don't flirt with the barista," but his eyes weren't laughing. He made me feel embarrassed for simply existing. I tried to reason. Everyone jokes. He's under stress at work. He loves me. He wouldn't. But the doubt crept in. I'd glance at the text logs. Nothing. I'd scan his social media. No evidence of flirtation. Yet when I turned to him, he'd arch an eyebrow and say, "Why are you looking at my phone again?" I'd apologize, heart pounding, and vow never to ask again. But I couldn't untangle the knot in my chest. I began to walk on eggshells, analyzing every tone in his voice, every glance he gave. My best friend Alex noticed my new habit of biting my lip. She pulled me aside in our favorite cafe. "I don't like this," she whispered, voice low. "He's controlling you and I see it." I shook my head. "No, you don't understand. I love him." Alex's brow furrowed. She traced circles on her latte foam. "I get that, but love doesn't make you feel trapped." I bristled and changed the subject. Later that night, I lay beside Jordan and stared at the ceiling. I recalled Alex's words, "trapped." I pressed my cheek to the cool pillow and vowed to trust Jordan. But what if Alex is right? Our little family settled into an uneasy routine. I'd tuck Mia into bed, kiss her forehead, and slip down the hall to Jordan's office. I learned to laugh a beat later if he made a sarcastic comment, so I wouldn't seem defensive. I learned to ask permission before checking my phone. I learned to minimize my texts with Alex fearing Jordan's irritated glance. And yet, when I dropped Mia at school each morning, she'd fling her arms around my waist and whisper, "Stay safe today, Mummy." I'd force a smile, tuck her hair behind her ear, and whisper back, "Always." I buried the growing dread beneath hospital scrubs and antibiotic charts. I comforted toddlers with scraped knees and parents with shaken voices. All was the calm in the storm, but inside, my heart raced. I'm good at hiding pain. That's how I existed before the courtroom, balancing compassion for others with my own spiraling uncertainty. I clung to the belief that Jordan loved me. I clung to Mia's bright smile each morning, and I clung desperately to Alex's unwavering loyalty, knowing that, someday, I might need her more than ever. Asterisk, asterisk. I stepped into Jordan's study one evening, the lamp casting long shadows across his mahogany desk. I watched his fingers hover over his phone. I felt a familiar knot tighten in my chest. I wanted to ask what he was reading. I dared not. I then heard the soft ping of a notification. I then watched his thumb swipe away the preview. I then felt my throat constrict. Why won't he let me see? I thought. I then closed my eyes and whispered, I'm sorry. I froze when he looked up. I froze when his eyes hardened. I froze when he said, you do trust me, right? I swallowed. I whispered, always. I then spent the next hour replaying every word. I then questioned every glance he gave me. I then found myself recalibrating my own reactions. A beat later, nodding at his jokes even when they stung. I then convinced myself it was for peace. I started noticing patterns. I started hearing the subtle edge in his voice whenever I spoke to Alex. I started shrinking our Sunday brunches to phone calls. I started hiding texts until after he went to bed. I started apologizing for my own thoughts. I battled panic in the grocery aisle. I battled trembling hands while paying the cashier. I battled a storm of doubts as I drove home. I battled each breath. I then saw the receipts. I then saw late-night rideshare bills. I then saw charges at bars he never mentioned. I then felt my stomach drop. I confronted him at dawn, the kitchen silent except for our breathing. I then demanded answers. I then watched his jaw clench. I then watched his eyes dart away. I then watched anger flash across his face. I whispered, who were you with? I then heard laughter. I then heard mockery. I then heard him sneer, you are paranoid. I then clenched the counter. I then heard my knuckles crack. I then imagined smashing every dish in sight. I'm losing it, I thought. I exhaled. I said, I deserve the truth. I then watched his face go cold. I then watched him step back. I then watched him say, you'll regret this. I staggered out of the kitchen, head pounding. I staggered into the hallway. I staggered to Mia's room and paused at the door. I staggered when I saw her drawings, our little family smiling under a sun. She believes in us, I thought. I then felt fury ignite. I then felt tears burn. I then felt my voice catch when I said, I can't do this anymore. I packed a bag that night. I packed her favorite pajamas. I packed my trust in Alex's car. I packed every ounce of courage I had. I then handed Mia to her grandmother the next morning. I then kissed her forehead. I then whispered, be brave for me. I then turned away before she could ask why. I sat in Alex's living room, trembling. I sat as Alex poured tea. I sat as she reached across the table. I sat until I broke a sobbed. I can't prove what he did. I sobbed. No one will believe me. I sobbed. I'm so ashamed. I then felt Alex's arms wrap around me. I then heard her whisper, you deserve better. I then heard her pull out her phone. I then heard. I recorded everything. I froze. I froze. I looked up at her. I looked at the play button on her lock screen. I looked at the streaming waveform creeping across the display. I looked and wondered, is this the proof I need? What happens next? I stood before Judge Whitman, my palms slick with sweat. I stood under the vaulted ceiling of the courtroom, every eye on me. I stood with the weight of 2 lives in my shaking hands. I stood knowing this moment would define me. I then heard my own voice falter. I then recalled Alex's recordings. I then realized how close I was to losing Mia forever. I then felt every heartbeat thunder in my ears. I can't fail her now, I thought. I swallowed. I swallowed. I swallowed. I then began my testimony. I then described the early mornings in our apartment. I then described the quiet dinners where his compliments turned to quips. I then described the nights I lay awake, replaying his accusations. I then revealed the deleted drafts. I then revealed the late-night charges. I then revealed the laughter that wasn't mine. I then revealed my terrified phone logs. I paused. I paused. I paused. I then signaled my lawyer. I then watched him hand me a USB drive. I then saw the jurors lean forward. I then heard the prosecutor's lips curl. I then inserted the drive. I then clicked play. I then watched the waveform climb. I then heard my own voice crisp, unfiltered. I heard Alex say, he told me not to tell her. I heard Jordan reply, she's unstable, she's jealous. I heard Alex counter, she's scared, and she deserves the truth. I heard Jordan sneer, you'll ruin her. I then gripped the edge of the witness stand. I then felt my knees threaten to buckle. I then felt tears sting my eyes. This is it, I thought. I then heard the judge's gavel tap. I then heard the courtroom exhale. I then saw Jordan's face drain. I then watched him slump. I choked out. He manipulated me. He lied. He tried to bury my voice. I then felt a hush descend. I then felt the jurors scribble notes. I then felt the weight lift from my chest. I reclaimed my story. I thought, then heard the prosecutor rise. I then heard her concede, no further questions. I then heard my lawyer's relieved sigh. I then heard Judge Whitman say, the court will reassess. I then walked back to Alex. I then wrapped my arms around her. I then whispered, thank you. I then whispered, I'm sorry I doubted you. I then saw Mia's drawing, explained to the clerk. I then saw the bailiff hand it to me. I then saw my daughter's crayon sun beam across the page. I then saw hope return. I then realized how far I'd fallen and how much farther I'd risen. I then realized I wasn't the obsessive ex-partner I'd been painted as. I then realized I was Clara, mother, nurse, survivor. I then realized I had my voice back. I then heard Alex's quiet question, are you okay? I then felt the judge's gaze from the bench. I then felt Jordan's defeated stare from the defendant's table. I then felt every soul in that room acknowledge my truth. I then took a deep breath. I then stepped out into the hallway. I then let sunlight wash over me. I then allowed myself to smile. What happens next? Asterisk, asterisk. I sat rigid as the courtroom reconvened. I sat waiting for the witness. I sat feeling my pulse hammer against my ribs. I sat knowing everything would change in the next breath. Then the door clicked. Then the bailiff announced, Miss Harper, please take the stand. Then my breath caught in my throat. I recognized her instantly, Jordan's assistant, Jasmine. Harper. I watched her approach the podium in crisp heels, her blouse neatly pressed. I watched her straighten her spine under the courtroom lights. She's the one who held the other phone. I held my lawyer's gaze. I held my breath. I held on to the hope Alex's recordings had sparked. Then the prosecutor began her examination. She prodded Jasmine about her role, scheduling Jordan's meetings, managing his emails, keeping his calendar pristine. She skated past the small talk, zeroing in on a critical day, the night Jordan accused me of obsession. Then Jasmine hesitated. Then her eyes flickered toward Jordan. Then her voice caught when she said, I noticed he was upset after our staff event. Then she revealed the unnoticed detail. Jordan had taken my phone from my purse that night, for safekeeping. Then she disclosed the secret. He'd cracked the passcode and scrolled through my messages, searching for evidence of my jealousy. He violated my privacy. I felt a rush of vindication. I felt tears spring. I felt my throat go dry. Then Jasmine slid an envelope across the podium. Then she retrieved a phone. Then she said, I recorded his confession. Then she pressed play. Then the courtroom filled with Jordan's voice, low, urgent, saying, she's too trusting. She never suspect the calls or the texts aren't ours. Then his laughter echoed. Then he bragged about deleting evidence to make her doubt herself. I pressed a hand to my mouth. I pressed to keep from sobbing. I pressed to steady my shaking frame. This is the truth they needed. Then the jurors exchanged glances. Then the prosecutor nodded sharply. Then she turned to me and said, Ms. Reyes, would you identify this voice? I inhaled. I inhaled the weight of every stolen moment. I inhaled the fear I'd carried alone. I inhaled the power of Jasmine's courage. Then I said, that's him. Then I said, that's Jordan. Then I said, that's the man who made me question my own mind. Then a swirl of reactions, gasp from the gallery, a sharp intake of breath from the judge, Jordan's face draining of color. This is it. Then the defense scrambled. Then Jordan's lawyer objected. Then the judge overruled, saying, Exhibit B will stand. Then my attorney placed the recording in evidence. Then I saw Alex in the back row. Then I saw her tears. Then I saw her whisper, you did it. Then I saw her reach out, thumbs lifted, mouthing, you're safe now. Then I realized how heavy the silence felt. Then I realized my story had shifted forever. Then I realized I had shattered his narrative with one simple truth. My voice is mine. Then the judge closed his eyes for a moment. Then he tapped the gavel twice. Then he said, we will recess before closing arguments. Then I exhaled. Then I clutched the arms of my chair. Then I let relief and dread wash over me in equal measure. What happens next? I returned to the courtroom as the light waned through the tall windows. I returned to the hush that settled with the jury's re-entry. I returned to the moment that would seal our fate. Then the jurors filed in. Then they sat, eyes forward. Then the bailiff called, all rise for the verdict. Then my legs trembled. I gripped my lawyer's hand. I gripped the armrest. I gripped the last shreds of composure. Then the judge peered down at the slip of paper. Then he cleared his throat. Then he proclaimed, "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff." I felt my chest expand. I felt tears flood my vision. I felt a sob claw at my throat. "It's over." Then the judge outlined his order: sole custody of Mia to me, protective order against Jordan, and a formal acknowledgement of his manipulative behavior. Then he laid the gavel down. Thud. I sank into the bench. I sank under the weight of what had been taken and what I'd reclaimed. I sank into the knowledge that, for the first time in months, I could breathe freely. Then the courtroom erupted in a quiet chorus of breathing journals scribbling, whispers fluttering, chairs scraping. Then Alex burst into tears. Then she rushed to me, enveloping me in a hug that shook us both. Then I felt Mia's grandmother approach, drawing me in. Then I felt her kiss my cheek. Then I felt her whisper, "You did the right thing." I looked at Jasmine, whose lips quivered in relief. I nodded, mouthed, "Thank you." I looked at my attorney, whose proud smile grounded me. I nodded again. Then Jordan stood slowly. Then he looked at me, anger and regret flickering across his features. Then he gathered his papers. Then he strode from the courtroom, head down. He lost more than this case. Then I stepped outside the marble doors. Then I let the summer air wash over me. Then I let the sunlight dry my tears. Then I let a small, real smile curve my lips. Then I knelt to hug Mia. Then I whispered, "Mummy's home." Then she wrapped her arms around my neck. Then she said, "I knew you'd win." Then I felt Alex slip me a phone. Then I saw messages of support flooding in. Friends, colleagues, even patients at the hospital. Then I saw the impact of truth. It reverberates. Then I realized the depth of my own resilience. Then I realized the power of allies who believe you. Then I realized the strength found in the quietest corners: Jasmine's courage, Alex's loyalty, Mia's faith. Then I drew in a steadying breath. Then I planted my feet. Then I looked toward the future one, where I set the boundaries, where my daughter thrived without fear, where my voice led the way. What happens next? Asterisk. I learned that truth doesn't need permission. I learned that your voice can be stolen, but never silenced. I learned that allies appear when you least expect them, sometimes in a best friend's text, sometimes in a hidden recording. I learned that children believe in our strength, even when we doubt ourselves. I know what it feels like to question your own mind. I know what it takes to rebuild trust, first in yourself, then with those you love. I know that healing is messy, that victory can be bittersweet, and that courage often hides behind tears. If anything from my story resonates with you, if you've ever felt gaslit, doubted, or unheard, remember this: your truth matters. Speak it, share it, and surround yourself with people who will amplify your voice, not mute it. If you've ever felt trapped, comment below with a 2. Let me know you're not alone. If you believe in the power of truth, like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. If you want more stories of survival and resilience, subscribe and hit the notification bell. I'm Clara Reyes, and this was my confession. Thank you for listening, and for believing me. ****.